Mark Messier, an NHL icon to the rest of the hockey world, but in Vancouver, he's a villain of legendary proportions. 3 years after crushing the Canucks' dreams in 1994, Mark Messier arrived in Vancouver and immediately became embroiled in controversies that still haunt Canucks fans. It's more than just stealing a number off a fallen hero or ripping the captaincy off Trevor Linden's chest. There are many reasons Canucks fans hate Mark Messier. Today, we dive into the real reasons why Mark Messier's tenure with the Canucks is the most hated chapter in team history. I don't need to add any more fuel to the fire. Canucks fans are going to hate Messier regardless of what's in this video. But I think it's only fair that I also share some of Messier's side of the story, so I will be referring to his book, No One Wins Alone, throughout the video. Unsurprisingly, he only dedicates 10 pages out of a 350-page book to his time in Vancouver. So that tells you all you need to know about what he thinks of his time as a Canuck. Without further ado, let's just get right into it. Before Messier even joined the Canucks, he had a serious history of being a dirty player. There are two incidents Vancouver Canucks fans are familiar with. The first came in 1984. This vicious attack on club legend Thomas Gerdine. This is the type of stuff that you should go to prison for, but it was the 80s. Hockey was a much different sport and Messier got away with a 6-game suspension. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to get suspended until NHL Executive Vice President Brian O'Neill saw the videotape. O'Neill asked Messier for his side of the story. Messier talked about this conversation later in the papers. Messier stated, "I know how hard I hit him. I told him it was a glancing blow." Glancing blow? Tell that to Thomas Gerdine, who was lucky he was wearing a helmet, which was still optional at the time. A decade later, Messier's Rangers were facing the Canucks in the Stanley Cup Finals. At the end of Game 6, Messier committed one of the most cowardly acts a man can do, hit someone when they're down. First, Trevor Linden was blindsided by Adam Graves. Linden stated, "It was a cheap shot. The game was over, it was 4-1 and Graves took a shot at me and I didn't see him coming and he blindsided me." As Linden was crawling to the bench, Messier, ever the opportunist, like a sore loser, cheap shots Trevor Linden. Now, this occurred off screen, but it led to the most iconic play-by-play call in Canucks history. Listen in.
Messier hit Linden when he was down on his knees. The play is running down. It could get a bit ugly here in the late stages. Linden has struggled to the bench. Now he's at the bench talking to the trainer. I didn't see who hit him the first time, but Messier hit him when he was down the second time, and Sergio Momessa was really upset at the Vancouver bench. But there is going to be that 7th game. We'll hope they can patch Linden up and get him in that one. He will play. You know he'll play. He'll play on crutches. He will play, and he'll play at Madison Square Garden on Tuesday night. The game is over.
Most Canucks fans don't even know it was Adam Graves that originally knocked Trevor Linden down, but every single fan knows about Messier's second hit. It's a fast sport. Things happen, and even Linden said that he respected Graves as a player. But what Messier did was far worse. You don't hit a guy when he's down, crawling to the bench on all fours with broken ribs and torn cartilage. If you want to send a message for Game 7, be physical throughout the game and play hard-nosed hockey. But Messier decided he was going to act like a petulant grade schooler who just lost at PE dodgeball. To add insult to injury, the Canucks lost in Game 7, even with Trevor Linden leaving his heart and soul on the ice. This image here is burned in the collective memory of Canucks fandom. Mark Messier giggling like a gossip girl before lifting the Stanley Cup. Nobody thought that 3 seasons later, he would don Canucks colors. But these colors are not Linden's colors. These are the colors of the new ownership, John McCaw and Orca Bay, who purchased the team in 1996 from the Griffiths family. The team was hemorrhaging money and McCaw was an impatient owner. In 1996, he wanted the Canucks to sign Wayne Gretzky. Even in the late 90s, Gretzky was the most marketable player in the league. I'm sure with the great ones centering Burry and McGillney, that would have sold a ton of season's tickets. There are competing versions of the story, but at the end of the day, the only thing we know for sure is that the Canucks gave Gretzky an ultimatum in the middle of the night. That rubbed Gretzky the wrong way and led him to signing with the Rangers. That entire saga could be a video of its own, but this video is for Mark Messier. In 1997, Messier became a free agent. He had every intention of remaining a Ranger, but they didn't give him 20 million reasons to stay. In his book, he states, "The idea of leaving New York was still really painful. The fact that I'd just come off a season where I scored 88 points in 71 games I thought demonstrated I could still do it at a high level." Who proofread this book? because Messier only scored 84 points in 71 games that year. So either he's gassing himself up or the publisher needs to recall all the copies. The Red Wings and Capitals were interested as well, but unfortunately for Canucks fans, Messier signed with the Canucks for 3 seasons and the nightmare began. If you guys are enjoying this video so far and love fan content, please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 10,000 and I can do it with your help. Thank you. This is a delicate situation, so I'm gonna do my best to stick to the facts. Wayne Mackey was an original Canuck after being selected in the 1970 NHL expansion draft. As an expansion team, the Canucks did not have many stars, so a hard-working, blue-collar player like Mackey became a fan favorite. In his 2 full seasons as a Canuck, he was amongst the scoring leaders, but midway through his 3rd season, he was diagnosed with brain cancer. He tragically passed away in May of 1974 at the age of 29. He was survived by his wife Beverly and their 2 children, Stephanie and Wayne Jr. After his passing, no Canuck wore the number 11 until Mark Messier arrived. At the introductory press conference, Pat Quinn stated, "We've tried to contact Mrs. Mackey to advise her that Mark was going to be wearing number 11, just so she wasn't surprised by it. Unfortunately, the Canucks were unable to reach her." In his book, Messier says, "I knew all about Wayne Mackey and I would have been absolutely okay not wearing number 11. I believe the Vancouver organization had spoken with the Mackey family and we had their blessing. I was sad to see it later reported that wasn't the case." Mark Messier here is accusing the Canucks organization of lying to him about having the Mackey family's blessing. I'm not going to make any inferences here. I'll let you guys debate who's really telling the truth down in the comment section. So, how did the Mackey family react? They were horrified. They found out by turning on the TV and seeing Messier don the number 11 jersey at the press conference. At first, they were irate. Wayne Jr. stated, "I spoke to Pat Quinn after the press conference and he apologized and told me he never lost respect for my father. They said they had tried to get a hold of us, but obviously they didn't try hard enough to get our blessing, which they don't have." I'm inclined to side with Wayne Jr. here. Pat Quinn was also an original Canuck and played 2 seasons with Wayne Mackey. After Mackey's death, the Canucks alumni helped out Beverly and the family for years, and even helped her renovate her home, which was in North Vancouver. Yeah, she was living just over the other side of the Lionsgate Bridge, so the Canucks definitely did not do enough to reach out to her about number 11. One of the issues was that the Canucks' hands were tied legally speaking. In 2017, photos of Mark Messier's handwritten contract were posted on Twitter. Take a look at Clause 9. Messier was contractually promised the number 11. Now, the Canucks are the ones that drew up the contract, but I don't see any reason for them to have added this clause if it wasn't important for Messier. By the beginning of the season, the Mackey family's initial anger and dismay had faded and was replaced by a touching display of grace and humility. Beverly Mackey had written multiple letters addressed to the Canucks and stated, "We've offered to let Mark wear it for the 3 years he plays here and then we want them to retire the number again. All I've been asking for is some acknowledgement." The Mackey family saw it as a great honor for Messier to wear the shirt, and they weren't denying him the ability to do so. They weren't looking for money. All they wanted was some acknowledgement and respect. Steve Tambellini, the Canucks vice president, came out and denied the number was ever retired, before offering to put up a plaque at GM Place that would stand forever. He stated that the Canucks were trying to arrange something. Unfortunately, this is where the trail goes cold. I was never able to find any evidence of any type of ceremony taking place, and I don't recall ever seeing a Wayne Mackey memorial at Rogers Arena. If such a thing does exist, please comment down below. But back to Messier, where was he during all of this? Well, he was taking cover under Pat Quinn. Messier stated, "I'm aware number 11 was worn by Mr. Mackey and I have offered to do numerous things. I've had numerous talks with Pat and he assured me not to worry about it. He was taking care of it. We even talked about doing some kind of ceremony." I have a few questions for Messier. If you were willing to wear a different number, like you said in your book, then why didn't you? If you were the leader that everyone made you out to be, then why didn't you do the right thing and just reach out to Mrs. Mackey personally instead of leaving it all up to the Canucks? What are these numerous things that you offered to do? And why did this ceremony never take place? This isn't meant as an attack. You had an opportunity to clear the air in your book, but chose to only discuss the Wayne Mackey situation in about half a page. A half page in which you accuse the Canucks organization of lying about having permission to wear the number. Your tenure began in Vancouver off on the wrong foot, and unfortunately for Canucks fans, it did not get much better. Ask any hockey fan what quality Mark Messier is known for. 90% of them will say leadership. There is a reason that the NHL Leadership Award is named after Mark Messier. But when Messier arrived in Vancouver, the Canucks already had their leader, Trevor Linden. This is probably why Pat Quinn didn't want to sign Mark Messier. Just a year prior in the Gretzky negotiations, Quinn was adamant that Trevor Linden was his captain. The Great One assured Quinn by telling him he wasn't interested in taking anyone's captaincy. Oh, how things would have turned out differently if the Canucks just signed Gretzky. We wouldn't have had the mess of 1997, but the new ownership was hell-bent on getting a return on their investment. After the signing, Linden's days as captain were numbered. Ownership wanted to move in a new direction, and they believed that Messier was the right man to lead them back to contender status. There were questions all summer about whether or not Trevor Linden was going to give up the C, and they were finally answered in Tokyo out of all places, where the Canucks had traveled to for the season opener. Even the Japanese journalists were hounding Linden about the captaincy, to which he responded that he and Messier were working it out. Finally, on October 2nd, Pat Quinn came out and said, "As of today, our captain is Mark Messier." Quinn stated that it was Linden's decision, and Trevor took full responsibility for giving up the C. But Linden was and still is a stand-up guy. He was never going to throw ownership or Messier under the bus. He even got up in the locker room before the season opener, gave a heartfelt speech, and told the team it was best if Mark Messier became captain. It must have hurt Linden deeply to make this speech, especially in front of guys that he went to war with in 1994. Jyrki Lumme, Kirk McLean, Gino Ojic, and Pavel Bure were still on the roster. The worst part of it all? He handed the captaincy to the man that lifted the cup that fateful night at the Madison Square Garden. To his credit, Messier acknowledges that this was the biggest mistake of his career. Thomas Grudin says hello. In his book, Messier states, "My misstep was that I didn't have the equity to function in the captain's role. I had no experience with these players and hadn't earned the right to lead them. It's good to see Messier take accountability here." But in 97, he had his work cut out for him. This team was kind of like the 2014-15 Canucks, who were also a couple of years removed from a finals appearance, with an ownership that was delusional about taking one last kick at the can. Messier knew that this team needed a rebuild, and like the 2014 Canucks, he needed a tyrant behind the bench to help fulfill his vision. The 97-98 Canucks season got off to a rough start, and by November, coach Tom Renney and Canucks icon Pat Quinn were both fired. The myth around Vancouver is that the arrival of Messier caused the locker room to become fractured, but that's not really true. The dressing room was a mess before he signed, but that doesn't mean he didn't further deepen the divide. But that makes sense. It was inevitable after Trevor Linden gave up the C. A true leader would have been able to heal those divides. But the new coach picked by Messier ensured that would never happen. Mike Keenan, and I didn't make the last part up. Keenan even admitted in an interview afterwards that John McCaw handed him a blank check and told him, "The only reason you're coaching this team is because Mark Messier wants you to." Now, Canucks fans had to deal with the captain and the coach that crushed their dreams in 1994. Of course, the guys remaining from that roster were going to feel uncomfortable with this. And Keenan did himself zero favors. On his return to St. Louis, the Canucks were getting beaten handily by the Blues. In the intermission, Trevor Linden was giving the boys a pep talk. Keenan singled him out and yelled, "Sit down, you f***ing idiot. Shut the f*** up. Just shut the f*** up. Who are you? What have you ever done?" This made the news at the time. Canucks fans were appalled. How can you treat a beloved figure in the city like this, after you already humiliated him by taking the captaincy away? You would hope that Mark Messier would stick up for his new teammates and try to endear himself to the city, but he didn't. After being traded to the Islanders, Gino Ojic came out and said, "Look what happened with Trevor in St. Louis when Keenan gave him hell." Did he come over to him and say, "Look, Trevor, we're with you"? He didn't say a word. How can you be a captain like that? Messier not only lost respect from the fans, but also a fan favorite. Linden's days as a Canuck were numbered, and things only got worse when Keenan was handed general manager duties in 1998. It was a fire sale. Linden was gone, and Messier writes, "It had nothing to do with Trevor's play. A new coach wasn't going to be enough to turn things around, and part of any rebuild is trading your important assets." This is a fair point, but the optics of it were poor, and it's understandable why Canucks fans were angry about this move. It felt like Messier was Keenan's assistant GM, pulling the strings behind the scenes, and Gino Ojic shed some light on this. He stated, "He talks to ownership all the time and he's responsible for Keenan being here, and he's part of most of the trades. He sits in for 4 hours with management every time there's a trade. Messier was even spotted with Keenan at Vancouver Grizzlies games. This cozy relationship led to an exodus of players. Jelena, McLean, Ojic were all gone. Even if the fans accepted the fact that the team needed a rebuild, having an outsider, the guy that beat you in 1994, pulling the strings instead of a competent general manager felt wrong. And the guys that left were being kicked out the door with no respect for the sacrifices they made for the organization. How did Messier defend this cozy relationship? He stated, "In order for a team to be successful, not everybody is treated the same." Pretty shocking statement from the captain of a lottery team. Fans were not happy, and it wasn't long before the boo birds started raining down. Put yourself in the fans' shoes for a second. Your fan favorites have been traded. Except for Pavel Bure, who doesn't even want to be there anymore. Your highest paid player is Mark Messier, and he's not even close to earning his contract. Most captains, and hockey players in general, don't make excuses, which is why it was jarring to see Messier try to explain his poor performance. This quote isn't from his 2021 book, it's from March of '98, deep into the season. He stated, "It's been a frustrating month for myself, playing with my sore elbow. There's been no time to sit out and rest. When you play injured and you're not 100%, you open yourself to criticism." Fans responded with their criticism in a game against the Islanders. Messier stole the puck from his teammate at center ice, Brian Noonan, and the fans rained boos down on Messier. This would not be the first time they did so. The elbow issue Messier dealt with was tendonitis. Pettersson dealt with this in his knee, but we didn't hear anything about it during the playoffs. This kind of stuff normally comes out after the season is over, and Messier didn't win himself any sympathy by bringing it up during the season. But the silliest excuse he made? Blaming the ice at General Motors Place. In the late 90s, the Canucks were still sharing the arena with the Grizzlies, so the ice quality was poor at times. Messier stated, "We have the worst ice in the league. We've got guys who excel on great ice. There isn't any excuse for it, and it's got to be fixed." The irony shouldn't be lost here. He is stating that there is no excuse for having poor ice, while making excuses for the Canucks' poor play. Earth to Messier. Both teams have to play on the crappy ice. If the Canucks are practicing on this ice and more used to it, it should give them an advantage if anything. This excuse was the tipping point for Don Taylor, who wrote an article titled, "Memo to Messier, Just Shut Up." It wasn't just the fans that noticed this laziness on the ice. Messier's teammates didn't appreciate his uninspired play either. Ojic stated, "He didn't break a sweat for the first 10 games and just waited for Tom Renney and Pat Quinn to get fired." Even the guys in the broadcast gondola were aware of this. In his second season, when Messier got into a fight, Jim Robson stated, "We haven't seen that from Messier for 2 seasons. How can you lead a team when you're not even giving it your all on the ice?" Which brings me back to Trevor Linden. Did he make an excuse or even talk about his broken ribs during the Stanley Cup Finals? No, he didn't. He went out there and scored 2 goals in Game 7. Unfortunately, in a losing cause, and super unfortunately to Mark Messier. And now, the fans had to watch Messier coast on the ice for $20 million. What if I told you guys that Messier's tenure in Vancouver could have been 5 years instead of 3? The Canucks held a team option on a 4th and 5th year, but thankfully chose not to exercise it. Messier was gone in 2000, but that wasn't the end of his story with the Canucks. The aforementioned handwritten contract came back to haunt the Canucks in 2012. Messier was promised phantom stock in the team. This entitled him to compensation if the market value of the team rose between 1997 and 2007. Even though the team was losing money while Messier was there, they started to see on-ice success after he left. This was during the West Coast Express era. That brought in more and more revenue. The value of the club rose, and by the letter of the law, Messier was owed money. But it felt really slimy. He didn't contribute to the financial success of the club. When he was there, ticket sales dropped drastically. He was long gone by the time John McCaw sold the team to the Aquilinis. But new ownership doesn't negate corporate obligations, and the Aquilinis had to deal with Messier's claims. Also, it wasn't a lawsuit as commonly believed. It never went to court. It was a grievance filed by Messier and the NHLPA against the Canucks. The arbiter agreed with Messier on all of his points, and outlined in a 40-page report why Messier was awarded $6.2 million from the Canucks. It doesn't end there. The NHL's greed knows no bounds. For a decade, Canucks fans could rely on Sportsnet broadcasting all 82 games, but earlier this season, it was announced that Amazon had picked up the rights for certain Monday Nighters. 4 of them will involve the Canucks. Mark Messier was announced as a headliner for the broadcast. I really hope that they take the term rotating broadcast seriously and rotate him out of the Canucks features. It was bad enough that he replaced Linden. I don't want to see a world where he replaces Shorthouse, Tomlinson, Murph, and Ferraro. I'd like to conclude this video with some good things that Messier did for the organization. This isn't to convince anyone that they should change their opinion of him. Canucks fans are always going to hate him, but it's only fair that I discuss these things. For one, the core was stale when he arrived. The Canucks needed to rebuild, similar to how they needed a rebuild after the Tortorella debacle. The Linden trade, as painful as it was, netted them Todd Bertuzzi, who became one of the best power forwards in the league. Brian McCabe was part of the package that allowed the Canucks to draft the Sedins, and they used the third rounder to draft Ruutu. By the time Brian Burke took over as GM, Messier didn't really have a say in trades anymore. Except for one instance. This is all from Burke's book, by the way. The Canucks were having issues with Kevin Weeks, their goaltender. A lot of issues. There was one incident when he showed up late for a game and claimed it was because he was robbed at knife point. His story was full of holes, and even his own teammates didn't believe him. Weeks was starting, and the Canucks had to call up an emergency backup. The kid's name was Alfie Michaud, an undrafted, 5'10" goalie fresh out of the University of Maine. Weeks felt a tweak in his knee and wanted to get it checked out. The Canucks trainer Mike Bernstein said, "No f***ing way, Weeksy. Get the f*** back out there." Weeks gave him the same response, saying that he wanted to get it checked out, to which Bernstein responded, "Get the f*** back out there. There's no way you're making this kid go in." At this point, Alfie was seeing stars on the bench and poured water all over himself. Poor guy was shaking trying to get a sip of water. Weeks got his way, but the Canucks were furious. Messier told Alfie, "Don't worry kid, just do your best." Somehow, Weeks' knee was miraculously healed at the end of the game. Bernstein told him, "Oh no, you're going through all the tests, starting with an MRI." Bernstein wasn't going to let Weeks off easily, and neither was Messier. He went to Burke and said, "Trade him, or I'll kill him." Here is just an example of how Messier used his leadership and authority to have a toxic player removed from the roster. His leadership also helped shape Naslund into the future captain. Naslund stated, "I have a lot of respect for Mark. He taught a lot of us young guys how to carry ourselves, and he was really easy to play with." As the Canucks were rebuilding, Messier took younger players under his wing. Matthias Olin stated, "I was 20 years old and just over from Sweden. I remember our first training camp in Whistler. He invited me to play golf with him, his dad, and brother." Messier was someone who really looked after the younger guys. Sometimes, you have to fall before you can rise. These 3 years were dark, of course, and Canucks fans will always hate Messier, but out of these ashes arose a phoenix, the West Coast Express era. That's all I have for you guys in this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.